Another thing, when you were walking out, I think at the airport, you got pulled aside for interrogation and you talked somewhere where like you used a lot of techniques that you have learned. I'm guessing from the other side where you probably trained for interrogation, or maybe they train you both sides where if you're on that side of the table, this is what you should do if you're on this side. And I feel like that also could be used at like interviews, dates, just networking, like a lot of places people can use it in normal life. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So they're called interrogation and counter-interrogation techniques. We talk about them in the book Shadow Cell, but they are also incredibly useful in everyday life, and they're not secret techniques. In fact, there's a lot of therapists that practice cognitive behavioral therapy and various other forms of individual therapy that use many of the same techniques that we had at CIA. So one of the most powerful is something called box breathing. And box breathing is a very simple process where you breathe in for 5 seconds, hold your breath for 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds, hold your breath for 5 seconds, and then start the whole thing again. Box breathing is a tool that will literally change your heart rate. It'll lower your heart rate. And when your heart rate lowers, your blood pressure lowers. And when your blood pressure lowers, your body temperature lowers. If your body temperature lowers, you're conserving energy and you start to look and appear more comfortable and confident. When you're in an interrogation, someone
Wait, quickly, maybe I'm overthinking it. Do you actually count out 5 seconds, or is it just like roughly 5 seconds?
You count it out. You count it
Okay.
out because you want to have a lot of consistency. And part of what you're doing with the box breathing is you're taking your attention away from the thing that's causing you stress, and you're putting your attention into this very clear, repeatable process, which many people, anybody listening who suffers from anxiety understands immediately that if you can just change your focus of attention, that's 80% of the problem, right? You're worried about whether or not your kid's going to crash the car over the weekend. As soon as you start thinking about something else, you're not able to think about whether or not your kid's going to crash the car over the weekend. So you can reduce all that stress. Another breathing technique that we learn is actually kind of creating what's called a back pressure breathing. It's something that's used by professional divers. So essentially when you're exhaling, you kind of block your airflow with your tongue. So just a small amount of air releases. It makes it so that your inhale is very short and deep, and your exhale is very long and slow. Again, that process drastically changes your heart rate, which has all sorts of secondary benefits in your body.
Perfect. Okay, I know we talk a lot about breathing, but I wanted to share because I've heard of it. Maybe we could talk about how to get other people to talk more, or how to make them like, open up basically. If you're in an interview and you're interviewing someone, how would you do that?
So there's several ways that you can get someone to open up. At the end of the day, when we talk about trying to get someone to open up in a conversation or open up to us, whether it's at an interview or a job description or a date, what we're really trying to say is how do you get the other person to be more comfortable talking to you? That's really what we're trying to do. It's not that we're trying to make the situation better. We're trying to make the situation better for the other person. One of the easiest ways to do that is through something we call mirroring. Mirroring is when you try to make yourself look and act like the person you're talking to. And the reason you do that is because you want the person talking to you to feel very safe when they talk to you. So you want to make them think, oh, that person looks like me. Subconsciously, we just naturally trust people who look like us. What is your heritage, Sam?
Indian.
Indian?
Yeah.
Do you just naturally trust people who look Indian?
Well, not on the phone, if I'm being honest.
So it's funny because I spent a lot of time working with Indians, and one of the big things that Indians always joked about with me was that they immediately trust anybody else with black hair.
Oh, wow.
They don't trust people who are blondes, they don't trust
I'll
brunettes,
pay
they don't
attention.
trust redheads, but they trust you if you have black hair. You already have an in with the Indian community if you have black hair. And that was a running joke, but it was a very real cultural element for them. And I have black hair, so it made it so that they kind of included me in the crowd, even though I wasn't Indian, obviously wasn't Indian, right? There's just a natural trust that exists when you look like somebody else. So mirroring is something you can physically do, how you move your arms, how you smile, how you hold your body, but it's also something you can do in the way that you speak. If the other person speaks slowly, you speak slowly. If the other person speaks fast and energetically, you speak fast and energetically. And what you're trying to do is make them feel comfortable being themselves around you.
Now, in interrogation, does this go out of the window if you're dealing with a trained professional, or do you have training for that, or is it separate?
So when you're in an interrogation, you're not trying to get the interrogator to open up. So it's a different objective, right? And so in an interrogation, what you're trying to do is get the interrogator to release their suspicions that make them feel like it's worth keeping you incarcerated. So you're trying to get them to believe that you are innocent. That's completely different than when you're trying to get a date to open up about their interests in their personal life, right? So in an interrogation, you're looking for consistency. You can choose whatever's natural to you. If you want to speak fast or slow, if you want to be energetic or boring, but you're very, very consistent with it. And when we learn counter-interrogation techniques, we try to tap into our natural instincts, not anything fabricated. You can't pretend to be high energy if you're actually not a high energy person. And you also can't pretend to be low energy if you're a naturally nervous person. So we have to practice finding who we really are so that when we get into that situation, it's easy for us to sustain for a long interrogation if we're acting like ourselves.
Well, I guess the main question was, let's say you're interrogating someone and you know he's a trained professional, not from US, from other agencies, China or Iran, whichever country. Do you still have like a protocol, or is it more like, oh, since he's trained, I have to do stuff out of the box?
Yes. When you know you're dealing with somebody who's trained, you have to leverage trained protocols. There's untrained protocols and trained protocols. An untrained protocol is how you carry out an interrogation against somebody who's not trained to resist. A trained protocol is how you carry out an interrogation against someone who is trained to resist. So why do I say that? Here's one simple controllable tool, all right? The room temperature. Inside an interrogation room, you can turn the temperature really high or you can turn the temperature really low. There's no reason to keep it comfortable. That's not helping you. So when you're dealing with somebody who's untrained, as soon as you put them in a hot or cold room, it really wigs them out. They start sweating, they feel self-conscious, whatever else, they start freezing and they can barely focus. So it really affects them. But when you put a trained person in the same room, they have techniques to deal with it. They have techniques to deal with the cold. They have techniques to deal with the heat. So you can't interrogate both people, the untrained person, the trained person, the same way. You have to change your protocol. So maybe what you do is you leave the trained person in the ass-cold room for an extra hour and a half longer than you leave the untrained person in the room. Because especially when it comes to an interrogation, there is no better ally on your side than time, because you control the time and the other person is going to get worn down over time.
Makes sense. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Mossad, and that's mainly because we see operations. I'm sure you saw the pager operation, which was great, right? But then I read about it or just study a little bit more about Mossad. They have a habit of overselling their capabilities. So as someone who's been part of the intelligence group, I'm sure you know how other agencies around the world operate. Is Mossad really above everyone else, or is it they're just really good at marketing?
Well, I don't think either one of those is necessarily the full truth. I think the way you have to look at Mossad is to think of Mossad as a very aggressive, very risk-tolerant intelligence agency. They will take risks and do things that nobody else would ever dream of doing. If you just think about the pager operation, there is no Western democracy that would dare to put explosive devices into commercial pagers. Because if one commercial pager accidentally explodes, and maybe it explodes in the hand of a Spanish citizen, how is MI6 or Canadian intelligence or American intelligence ever going to explain, oh yeah, we put bombs inside those pagers. We didn't expect that some Spaniard would get a hold of it, right? So we're so afraid of the international backlash that even though we have the capacity and the skill set to do it, we don't take those risks. Well, Israel doesn't care about the Spaniard. Maybe he does lose his hand. In the pager operation, they killed dozens of innocent people. They killed people that were in markets. They killed children. They killed all sorts of people in addition to killing their targets. And there was international backlash. And Israel said, we care. We don't care if a bunch of Islamic children died. They were probably going to be extremists anyways. And that's what makes the world so hostile against Israel right now. Because you can't just assume that a Palestinian child is going to be some Muslim extremist later on. But Israel's not taking the chance. Israel's saying, kill everyone now, and then we don't have to worry about it later. And when you think about it through a lens of Israel, you can kind of justify how it makes sense to them.
Well, I guess since we're talking about thinking about from their lens, now they're realizing it is important to have the public on your side, right? Even Prime Minister Netanyahu is going on podcast basically after he said publicly Israel's losing the propaganda war. So I guess this is more of your opinion. Is it right the way they're operating considering how much backlash the country is getting as a whole? It is insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's not insane because it's right. Israel has overreached in terms of what is plausible and rational when you say that you're trying to defend yourself. There's only so much you can do using that one excuse. And after a certain period of time, people start wondering, like, why are you bombing Syria? How does bombing Syria have anything to do with Hamas in Gaza? And when you start having, it's a really hard stretch, right? And when they're literally like bombing hospitals with children and women in it in a small little secure area, that's all that's left of Gaza, and they're claiming, oh, that's because Hamas is hiding there. Their whole world looks at that and they're like, how do you know? You've bombed every corner of Gaza. How do you know they're hiding there? They've extended beyond reasonable expectations, and the whole world is waking up to that. So you're exactly right. They know they're losing the propaganda war, and the reason that's a problem is because Israel doesn't really care about their image right now. They don't care if the whole world hates them. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to really talk to, there are a number of very hawkish, conservative Israelis, and they literally believe that everybody in the world hates Jews. They really believe that the whole world doesn't care if every Jew dies. I think it's a ridiculous idea, but that's the way they think. So they believe that since nobody's on their side, they have to take every possible action. And that's the same foundation that Netanyahu is operating from. So again, when you look at it through their perspective, you kind of understand where they're coming from. What Israel's really concerned about is the next generation of radicals that are being created because of Israel's actions right now. They no longer have to worry about just radicals coming out of Lebanon and Gaza. Now they have a future for the next 30 years. They're going to be dealing with radicals from Syria, radicals from Iran, radicals from Iraq. They're going to be dealing with radicals from the United States.
No, that's what I was going to say. Because, we do geopolitics. So people, I don't know why, it was just shocking to me. They open up very quickly. And the amount of young people who are so open about hating Jews is like I don't know them that well. Like if they're friends or something, maybe they open up to me, that's fine. It's like they see the channel and they talk about that a lot. It is shocking.
It's shocking. And I think that's what Netanyahu is really realizing. He's like, oh, we stopped the bad guys for now, but 10 years from now, all the 8-year-olds that survived this bombing are going to be 18-year-olds wearing bombs strapped to their chests who are going to walk into synagogues all over the world.
And since we're talking about propaganda, I would say, in my opinion, one of the best countries at propaganda is Russia. And one of the propaganda, in my opinion, they've been pushing is there was a CIA-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014, and that's what has led to all this. That's why Putin took over Crimea in 2014, Donbass again just a few months after that, and that's why he launched the invasion. Did CIA carry out a coup in 2014?
Most likely not. Because CIA's policy for many, many decades has been one of non-involvement in the transition of power. Because what we learned in the 70s and 80s, as we shaped Latin America by choosing who was going to be president and who wasn't, we learned that we really jacked up Latin America. So instead, we follow a policy where we encourage chaos rather than any specific outcome. So did US dollars possibly support covert action in Ukraine in 2014? That's not an unreasonable expectation. But
what does that mean, covert action? Our audience, we follow this very closely, that's why.
Yeah. So does that mean that American dollars, CIA dollars, would have been used either through a cutout or even directly to fund the chaos surrounding 2014 in Ukraine? I don't think that's an unreasonable hypothesis, right? Whenever you're combating Russia, whenever you're dealing with European security, whenever you're dealing with the security of commodities like natural resources, oil, precious minerals, etc., it makes sense that CIA would be involved. So I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that CIA may have been involved in the activities of Ukraine in 2014. But to say that they orchestrated a coup is a step too far. And this is why Russian propaganda is so good. The most effective propaganda is based in truth first. It takes a kernel of truth and then layers on top of that all sorts of speculative explanations that make people think that there's some sort of larger conspiracy happening. So you say something like, oil refineries have been catching on fire more often than normal. It must be Ukrainian covert action funded by CIA. The kernel of truth is, yes, oil refineries have been catching on fire, but everything else is just speculation specifically designed to get people angry at Ukraine and the United States. Because Russia knows Emotion is a very powerful tool, especially in a country like Russia where you're forced to repress your emotion. If you've ever seen like a Russian sitting next to a Brazilian, they're two completely different people. The Brazilian gets angry and talks about everything, and the Russian just looks like dead to the world, even though they are also angry. They're just not flamboyant about it.
No, that makes sense. And I know you've been following this war ever since it started. You have made some good points, I would say, about, I don't know if I would agree that Russia is winning the war, but I think they think they're winning the war. And maybe you can expand on that, because I think you have said where Russia is winning the war.
Russia's winning the war, and there's no way that you can cut this up to make it look any other way, because Russia owns part of Ukraine right now. Whether we like to admit it or not, 17% of what was Ukraine now belongs to Russia. And Putin doesn't even feel the need to show up to the negotiation table. He actually has enough power that he can blow off President Trump, he can blow off the EU, he can blow off NATO, and he can say, I'll be there, and then never actually show up. You know you have the most power in a negotiation when you can skip the negotiation and people still want to talk to you. Zelensky has none of that power. Zelensky's chasing his tail everywhere. Trump says, come to America, he comes to America. The EU says, come to London, or come to Brussels, he goes to Brussels. The UK says, come to London, he goes to London. He goes anywhere the money is, because he understands he is completely dependent on other countries to save Ukraine. The other reason Russia is winning is because Russia's goal is not to take over Ukraine. Their goal has never been to take over Ukraine. Their goal has been to demonstrate Russian power and Russian military relevance so that NATO doesn't try to butt up against Russia. And that's exactly what they're doing. They have made a war last for years. Do you remember when people said that Putin was going to be ousted from within? Remember those headlines?
Yes, yeah, 100%.
Remember the headlines where people were like, oh, Putin's actually sick and dying. He has brain cancer. You remember those headlines?
I mean, those were probably a bit too far. It's like how people are talking about right now, Trump has, something where some people talk a lot.
So the real war that Russia has been winning is a war of information. Now we think Russia's strong again. The war has in many ways helped their economy. It's certainly made Putin that much stronger. They have closer relationships now with China, Iran, India than they ever had before. This war has done nothing but help Russia, which is why they're winning. And this war has done nothing but hurt Ukraine, which is why they're losing.
Yeah, I guess I would push back on a couple of points, because this is a new Russian talking point where they say they never wanted Ukraine, all of Ukraine, just wanted Eastern. But on the first day of the war, the Russian tanks were heading towards Kyiv. And it was the javelins and all the stuff the US gave that was able to stop all that. So it's like they couldn't take over Ukraine. I think that's why they're now saying, oh, we never wanted it.
No, the propaganda message has been the same. You can actually look up news reports from the first 2 weeks of the war, and you can see that Putin was publicly saying, I have no interest in taking sovereignty away from Ukraine. But if Ukraine continues to fight back, we will defeat them. So I'm not saying that he doesn't have a secret intent, but what I'm saying is propaganda-wise, propaganda has to be very consistent or else it doesn't work. So he has had a very consistent propaganda message from beginning to end. We don't want to take over Ukraine. Maybe he actually does, but he's saying he doesn't want to. He's also saying we don't intend to threaten your sovereignty. Maybe they actually do, right? But he's also saying all I really want is the Donbass region, which makes sense because that's where all the wealth of Ukraine is. Whether that's true or false, we never know his true intentions.
No, for sure. No, I agree with that. But that's the thing though, in Russia, the state TV is controlled by Kremlin. You know how a lot of people said that they wanted to take over Kyiv in 3 days? That's not something Putin said. That was something Russia Today was saying when they launched it. So which is like, technically, like it's coming from Kremlin. They wanted to take it over in 3 days, which makes sense, right? This is something I learned from you, where the Crimea stuff, they came in so quickly and they wanted to just quickly do it because they realized like if they do it quick, the West is not going to come fight it if we take it over in like, let's say a day, which they did with Crimea. But
they did the same thing in Georgia. They did the same thing in Georgia in 2010. So Russia has an MO. I think they underestimated Ukraine because what Ukraine did, Georgia couldn't do and Crimea couldn't do. Ukraine mounted enough of a resistance that it gave the West time to get involved.
For sure. Have you seen the fight over the airport? So, because if they had taken the airport, it would be like Crimea 2.0. Have you seen that?
No.
You should see that. This is one of those movies where it would go crazy, because if Russia was able to land 2 helicopters of like their Marines or whatever they have, they would have like the government building, but Ukraine didn't let them land. So that's basically what turned the war at the beginning. But the another part is like, okay, let's look at it this way. If maybe I'm making a mistake, so you can fix it. Of course, you have more experience than me. If US 3 years into Iraq, we had 20% of the country, would you say US is winning?
I guess, again, I don't think this is a wrong way of looking at it, but the ambitions were different. We didn't try to take Iraq. We were trying to kill Al-Qaeda, right? We could have taken 100% of Iraq if we really wanted to.
Which we did. We replaced the government, right?
Yeah, the goal was go in and find a way to make it not a safe haven for terrorism anymore. So it's different ambitions. We went in, we found a sympathetic government, we trained Iraqi military to basically fight our fight for us, so we thought. So we didn't need 100% of territory, right? I think the reason that Russia went after Kiev so fast was because they wanted the same thing. They knew that if they could control Kiev, then they would control Ukraine. And they still know that, which is why Kiev is the center of so many rocket blasts. As soon as Zelensky is killed in a rocket blast, they win forever.
No, for sure. I think that's the goal. They want to just have a government that's more pro-Russian. That's
Correct.
what they're trying to do.
They don't want to make Ukraine a satellite state of Russia. Russia can't even afford itself. What it wants is to basically reinstate the Soviet states that kept Russia afloat for so long.
Let's coming back to Mossad, and this is something you mentioned, so I just wanted to share with the audience. Mossad ran a company, and the funniest part is when they did the pager thing, they ran that company profitably, which was, and you have said CIA runs a lot of companies, and I wanted a little bit more details, as much as you can share. Do they run it in the United States? Are they running it overseas? Is the profit a motive? Are they like public companies on the stock market? Like, however much you can share.
Yeah, so this is going back to our earlier part of our conversation. You were asking about whether most operations are run out of embassies. And I said that prior to 2001, it may have been the case. But after 2001, we've diversified operations all around the world, not just CIA, but all modern sophisticated intelligence services. Who are those modern sophisticated intelligence services? CIA, Mossad, MSS, which is Chinese, SVR, which is Russian, CSIS, which is Canadian, ASIS, which is Australian. Like, there are many. First, the BND, which is German, the DGSE, which is the French, MI6, of course, in Great Britain. Like, these are all sophisticated intel organizations who have learned how to create commercial operations. Commercial operations are exactly what you just described, Sam. They are for-profit businesses that operate like a business, but are actually a shell organization for intelligence collection efforts. What's really crazy is that when these corporations, when these shell companies are good at being a business, they make a profit. But where does that profit go? You can't pay it to the CEO because the CEO is an operative. They're a federal government employee. They can't take that kind of money. You can't pay the employees because the employees are either also government operators, or you have to hide from them the fact that it's a giant government operation. So because they're what's called unwitting. So what ends up happening is all of the proceeds, all of the profit from these commercial operations go into what we call a black budget. A black budget is a budget that Congress can't control. It's a budget that exists exclusively to the Department of Defense or the intelligence services. All over the world, they have black budgets. Congress can only control taxpayer dollars. If you and I start an intel operation, and as part of that intelligence operation, we create a camera shop, and that camera shop makes $1 million a year in profit, you and I can't split that profit, so that $1 million a year goes into the black budget. And Congress can't take it away because it wasn't taxpayer money. You see what I'm saying? So that's how the commercial operations work. And that's also why so many intelligence officers become business people after they leave the intelligence service, because it's the only other skill they have.
No, okay, it's perfect last question, actually, if we're tight on time. Now, you had to leave the agency because it was basically a choice between your kids or the agency, right? And they didn't want to work with you, where basically decrease your off load. I'm correct in that, right?
You're absolutely right, Sam.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we want to look at this from the agency's point of view. Maybe that was on purpose, right? They wanted you to make a decision where, like, either pick the agency, that's where you're the best, or just go with the kids. Because I just remember this quote from the F1 where some the driver owner or some race owner, he said every time a driver has a kid, his speed goes down by 1 second because he's not taking the same risk he was taking before. Is that something like agency is considering when you go to them with an offer like, hey, could you decrease my workload?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I really applaud the fact that you're practicing that perspective versus perception skill that we talked about earlier in the interview. I think you're exactly right. CIA wants people who are mission first, family second. Well, when I went to CIA and said, hey, I'd like to focus on my family, that's not someone who's mission first. And it's completely in their best interest to say, you have to make a choice. Are you going to choose us or are you going to choose family? And once you make the choice, they're going to make sure that you hold to that choice. So if you say, I pick CIA, they're not going to give you extra days off to go be with family. They're going to expect you to work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, all over the world. Likewise, if you say, I want to be with family, then they're thinking, perfect. I no longer have to waste my time or resources on you. I can focus those on new upcoming officers that don't have this burden of family.
Now, I guess one more short one. And I know you have restrictions on the book, and I'm sure there are a lot of stuff you couldn't talk about. Are there any more restrictions you have? Like, is there some kind of business you cannot go into, even if you're good at business, or some kind of country you can't visit? Like, what's the life like for a former CIA officer after he's done? What restrictions he has to deal with?
So we all have a number of restrictions in terms of what countries we can be affiliated with in a professional sense. We can't work for the Chinese. We can't work for the Russians. We can't work for the Iranians. To do so would essentially immediately put our name on a watch list with the FBI because we are individuals who have state secrets. Just because we signed a paper that said we wouldn't share those state secrets doesn't mean we can't still give them away, like Edward Snowden has proven. So there are restrictions over where we can work. There's also restrictions over what we can publish. We literally can't publish anything that we create without CIA approval. That's one of the reasons why you see me on so many interviews, Sam, rather than my own channel, is because when I talk on an interview, I'm not the one creating it. I'm just answering your questions. And CIA doesn't have a policy about that. But they do have a policy about me creating my own book, my own movie, my own story, my own blogs. I always have to get those approved, and so does every CIA officer. So there are certainly restrictions, but the most difficult part of being a former CIA officer is just the fact that there are so many people who don't like the CIA. When they meet you, they immediately don't like you, as if you're the one responsible for whatever they don't like about CIA. And that's a very difficult thing, to be so immediately judged. And that is honestly one of the least secure parts of living in the United States, is that I never know when I'm going to run into somebody in the airport or on the street or at a gas station who really hates CIA so much that they might threaten me or my family.
That's the dumbest thing I've heard. Because again, people who are protecting the country sometimes have to make hard decisions on the field, but a lot of people who are safe here are because of those decisions. So thank you so much for doing that for the country.
It's my pleasure, and I really do feel like I was the one who was privileged and honored. But anybody listening to us right now will be able to scroll through the comments and see how much hatred is in the comments and how many ignorant people have weighed in on the comments who are right now trying to see if there's a way that they can reduce or delete their comment after they made it.
I think on this channel you will not see that, because a lot of people I think they understand that a lot of decisions US makes overseas is because to protect citizens at home.
Beautiful, man. I can't wait to see that positive, intelligent conversation then.
Perfect. And again, book is in the description. Anyone interested, definitely go check it out, and we'll hope to have you soon. It was really nice talking to you.
Thank you. And Sam, let me just be the first one to tell you, we actually just received bestseller status today. Even before the book has gone live, we are Amazon bestseller and we are an Amazon editor's pick for the entire month of September after only a few days of sales on Amazon.
Perfect. And maybe we can push that even higher.
Thanks, man.